It's been a very difficult 4 weeks, and I want to speak to that this morning. And before I do, I want to put first and foremost, at the front, at the top, a prayer for captives. I think that with all the conversation we've been having on every level, and all the media and commentary that we're consuming, we need to keep front and center the hostages. In Judaism, Pidyon Shvuyim, the redemption of captives, is one of the highest mitzvot. So I want to do that by inviting Sharon Navet to come up and lead with me a prayer which you find in the program that you picked up coming inside, of the inside cover, a prayer that was written by Gilad Kariv, who actually is not only a member of Knesset, but he's actually an Israeli-born, ordained Reform rabbi in Israel, and he's now a member of Knesset, been a very important voice of conscience well before this war started. And he has written this prayer, this Mishaberach, which Shir will read in Hebrew and I'll read in English.
Okay. Hi, good morning, everybody. I want to dedicate my prayer to my beautiful 20-year-old nephew, Ido Agmon. Oh, good morning. I want to dedicate my prayer to my beautiful 20-year-old nephew, Ido Agmon, who serves in an elite unit in the IDF, risking his life so that Israel remains a safe haven for Jews, and so that all of us here in the West can continue to enjoy all of our freedoms. So I'm grateful to Ido beyond words. תפילה למען חירותם של השבויים. מי שברך אבותינו ואימותינו, אברהם ושרה, יצחק ורבקה, יעקב, לאה ורחל, ואת לוחמינו, יהושע, דוד ויהודה, דבורה, יעל ויהודית. הוא יברך את שבויי לוחמיו, there's a typo, את שבויי לוחמיו הנעדרים ואת אזרחי ישראל הנתונים בשבי ובצרה. יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני צבאות, שתפדה נפשם משבי ותחזירם במהרה לארצם, ויקוים קול ברמה נשמע נהי בכי תמרורים, רחל מבכה על בניה. בהם הכתוב, מענה להנחם על בניה, כי איננו. כה אמר אדוני, מנעי קולך מבכי ועינייך מדמעה, כי יש שכר לפעולתך, נאום אדוני, ושבו מארץ אויב.
I should say that Shir and Gil also have 2 daughters living in Israel right now, and we pray for their health and well-being as well.
In the IDF. They're both
in the IDF. Yeah. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Avraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rivka, Yaakov, Leah, and Rachel, Bilhah and Zilpah, and our warriors, Joshua, David, Judah, Devorah, Yael, and Judith. May that God bless the captured IDF soldiers and the many kidnapped citizens, men, women, young children, and even infants, held in painful captivity in Gaza. May it be your will, Adonai Tzot, God of hosts, to rescue and redeem these souls and return them swiftly to their families in the land of Israel. We say amen. I want to share with you this morning 3 stories. From each, I hope we might extract one or more lessons that might be helpful in these very painful and difficult times. My first story is about my daughter Jenny, my youngest. And I want to say I really appreciate all the members of the community who have reached out to myself and to Sandy asking for her well-being. Jenny made Aliyah 8 years ago, lives in Tel Aviv. Interestingly enough, a couple years ago when Hezbollah was shooting rockets landing in Tel Aviv, Jenny got through it. Didn't have much experience growing up with rockets landing on her in Rockville, Maryland. Maybe some potholes, but no rockets. And at that time, she was living on the top floor of a 4-story apartment building, and her neighbors, who she had not yet met, said to her, "You don't want to be on the top floor when the rockets are falling. Next time there's a air raid siren, come to our apartment." They were living on the 1st floor. And Jenny got to meet her neighbors and their children, and she, on a regular basis, every time the sirens ran, when rockets rained down, even on Tel Aviv, she made her way down to the stairwell and became friends with the people in the downstairs. And when they heard, literally not just a siren, but the rockets blowing up in the neighborhood, they learned to go into the stairwell, which is the most secure part of that apartment building. And she got through it. But not so this time. There was something about the violence of October 7th, the person-to-person violence, the atrocities, the barbarity with which these atrocities were conducted, that shook her to her core. And she lives alone, and she lives in an older part of Tel Aviv called Bethesda. Some of you know it. There's no safe room in her apartment. The nearest shelter is 2 blocks away. And she felt unsafe. And so 4 days into the war, she looked for the first flight leaving Israel, and she went, of all places, to Germany. She spent about 10 days in Munich and then moved to a friend of hers in Frankfurt. And thank God, on Thursday night, 2 days ago, she landed in the States, where she's attending a reunion of her Adat fellowship, which is what actually first planted the seed in her mind to make Aliyah. It's a very elite fellowship for a year. And ironically, the only reason Jenny left Israel, she would not have done so if her parents had suggested it. Some of you can relate to this. But when she called the director of the Adat Fellowship program in Israel, with whom she became quite close in the fellowship program, he said to her, "Jenny, what are you still doing in this country? We sent all the Adat fellows for this year home already. Leave the country as soon as you can." And on Neil's suggestion, she left and is this weekend spending her time with all the alumni of the Adat Fellowship at a retreat center in Connecticut, and we'll see her, please God, on Sunday night. It's not clear what her future leads her because her home is Israel. Of course, there's a tragic irony in the notion that she fled to Germany. My father left Berlin 2 weeks before Kristallnacht, having been born in Berlin, left Germany at the age of 16, never to see much of his family again. I've lived a lot of this war, not just through the media, but also through the eyes of my daughter. She feels outrage at her many friends who post on social media things about the war and about Israel, Israel as oppressor, Israel as a conductor of genocide, which get her so outraged that she has defriended more people than she even knew she had friends. Lifelong friends, people who went to the Jewish day school with her, who are posting things that she finds so outrageous. And she says now what many American Jews have always had a hard time accepting and understanding, and she says, if they're not Israeli, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. And she made a request to me before she even flew to the States. She says, "Dad, I don't know how long I'm going to stay home in Rockville. It won't be long. But please find me some Israelis to be with. I don't even want to be with Americans right now. I need to be with Israelis." This is the notion and the feeling of kinship and vulnerability and exposure that all Israelis are feeling right now in this month. The confidence of Israelis and of the Jewish people that Israel's military capability will keep its country secure and its citizens safe has been shattered. It exposes a deep sense of vulnerability, and it taps into a deep sense of historical trauma rooted in the Shoah. And I will come back to that theme. My second story is about Rabbi David. Rabbi David is a rabbi on the West Coast who's an alumni of a program that I run, my day job, when I'm not on this bima. My day job is I run a national fellowship for rabbis of all denominations, from Orthodox to Jewish renewal and everything in between. It's a 2-year fellowship on visionary leadership and institutional transformation. It's the work that I've been committed to for several decades, and I get very close to my CLE fellows. CLE is the acronym Clergy Leadership Incubator. So this Rabbi David calls me up last week, and he asked whether I would participate in making an ad that will be posted on social media. And he's quite transparent with me. He says, the ad was written by the Jewish Voice for Peace, a group that you may have heard of. Jewish Voice for Peace is a Jewish group that anchors the far left of the American Jewish spectrum. Some would argue that it's off the spectrum, that it's gone too far, seriously. I'll get back to that theme for a moment. And they are very virulently anti-Zionist. And they have been organizing a lot of rallies around the country, including the one in the Capitol, which led to a bunch of arrests. A group called If Not Now, which actually arose to be a counterpoint to Jewish Voice for Peace, has surprised me because they've been essentially between Jewish Voice for Peace and, maybe it's a bad analogy, but if you say like maybe J Street or something, but If Not Now has been in total lockstep with Jewish Voice for Peace since the beginning of the war. I assume there's been some change of leadership. I don't know the inside story, but all these rallies and protests and ads have been done by both groups. So David said, JVP's put together an ad. They want about 20 prominent American rabbis to do a voiceover for a script that they've written. Would you be one of them? I was surprised by the ask. I've always felt that I did not feel comfortable with the position of the Jewish Voice for Peace. And that's well before the war. I've engaged with them before. But at the same time, I've argued strenuously that the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community, has made a tragic mistake by essentially blackmailing and identifying some voices in the Jewish community as beyond the pale and no longer loyal to the Jewish people. And they've included Jewish Voice for Peace in that. And even though I don't align with their policies and their strategies and their analyses of the situation, I think that we've done great damage to the next generation of Jews by saying that your views are not only wrong, but are beyond the bounds of acceptable speech and discourse. I thought long and hard about how I was going to respond to David's ask. I wrote my email very carefully. I told him I was in deep disagreement with the analysis and policy prescriptions of JVP. But I also, in my refusal, I did not question David's love for Israel. I did not label his humanitarian impulses naive. I did not make him feel like he was a traitor to the Jewish people, because he is none of the above. There are many families in this community, in our own community, in Adat Shalom, who have family members and children who right now align with the analysis of Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now. And there are painful conversations happening in homes in our own community. And some people, I don't want to just say this is only the next generation, although it's heavily so, even people of our age may be of that view. The reality is that the analysis of JVP and the progressive left portrays Israel as a colonial oppressor of the dispossessed Palestinian people. As you well know, the progressive left for some time has aligned with an analysis of the world that demonizes Eurocentric countries with wealth and power and rallies around people of color anywhere in the world who are poor, dispossessed, and suffering. At another place, another time, we can debate that analysis. But sad to say, both Israel and America are on the oppressor side of that equation. Many groups whose causes Jews championed for decades will not now rally around Israel. Don't expect it. It won't happen. The world is totally polarized, and people are choosing sides. I'm outraged that so many groups will now issue statements about the war and not even mention the atrocities of Hamas on October 7th. Not even mention it. Or the fact that Hamas, as recently as this week, a leading official of Hamas on TV, in an interview with Al Jazeera, said, "We will sponsor hundreds more October 7ths. And the more civilian Jews we can kill, the better it will be." On TV. This is not about a two-state solution. This is about a group whose goal is to wipe Jews off the face of the earth. And that does not stop at the borders of what is now considered the state of Israel. But I'm equally outraged that for more than 50 years, an internal American Jewish family feud has paralyzed effective U.S. intervention to push a two-state solution. I did a whole course last year. It took me 3 full weeks to unpack that, and I won't do that here. I think all those lectures were taped and you could find them. But how many of you know who Mayor Ben-Venisti is, or was? He passed away. Anyone know the name Mayor Ben-Venisti? Raise your hand. We don't even have a minion of hands in the neighborhood. Okay. So Mayor Ben-Venisti during the Six-Day War was the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, serving under the legendary Teddy Kollek. And within a year of the war, in 1968, Ben-Venisti published a report, which was published and distributed by the Ford Foundation, actually, in which he argued that now is the time for Israel, at a time of its highest and greatest power, to come up with a solution to give Palestinians a state, to divide the land, to give back the territories that were occupied or captured by Israel in the Six-Day War, to divide even Jerusalem, and to say, now's the time to say, let's share the land. It's now kind of a footnote of history, the Ben-Venisti report. But since that report in 1968, for the next 55 years, there have been dozens of plans to create a two-state solution, to allow two people to share land with two histories and two very different narratives about how the region got to where it is today. I can say a lot more about how it is that this internal Jewish family feud has paralyzed the U.S. government from playing a helpful and constructive role at advancing that peace process. Again, a talk for another time and another place. But the script for the failure of 55 years of attempting to find a peaceful solution to the conflict in the Middle East was written in this week's Torah portion. When Sarah says to Abraham, if you really love me, you need to send out Hagar and Ishmael. There could only be one heir to this promise from God. There could be only one heir to this land promised to us, the Jewish people. So send out Hagar and Ishmael and choose Isaac over Ishmael. And Abraham at first hesitated. And then God said, listen to your wife. I'm glad that didn't get a laugh. Because that's the script for the last 55 years of failure of peace in the Middle East. Abraham could have said, there's enough love and there's enough land to be shared. And if we can't find a way to share in that love and in the land, we will kill each other trying. I will allow you to figure out who represents who in the unfolding tragedy of Middle East politics of the last half century. Now, Israel is not in a position of power. It is not where it was when Ben-Venisti issued his report in 1968. Israel is in a position of vulnerability and weakness. And the vultures are flying overhead. Every enemy of Israel, including Iran, is ready to pounce. It is not clear if Israel could be victorious in a multi-front war that included Iran. Israel's options are few, and they range from bad to worse. As a lifelong Zionist and a lover of Israel, I'm struggling to be optimistic. Third story. This week, the Washington, D.C. Federation convened a leadership convening. I see Tal Wittes was there, I saw. I don't know who else might have been there for here. Jacob, of course, Jacob Feinspan. It was actually quite a remarkable evening, and again, a story for another time. We can be very proud of our federation, by the way, and if you're looking for places to make contributions, because there's so little that we can do on this side, I strongly encourage you to make gifts to the Israel Emergency Fund that is sponsored by the Jewish Federation. There are dozens of organizations in Israel that are asking for money right now. All are probably quite worthy. but the federation system is actually plugged in a way that no one else is. And I urge you, if you're generous enough and have the capacity, to make your gifts through the Israel Emergency Fund of the Federation. So there was a panel of 4 people, local Jewish community professionals, who responded to a keynote address given by Yehuda Kurtzer, who's the North American president of the Shalom Hartman Institute. And one of them, I actually knew 3 out of the 4 quite well, and Rachel is someone I know very well. She's a young, very extraordinary Jewish professional who's half my age, and recently took a job as the national director of engagement for National Hillel. So overseeing and reaching out to several hundred college campuses around the country. And Rachel said in her remarks to the leadership gathering, she says, what brought me into Jewish life to become a Jewish professional is that I always preached and talked about and led in my work to talk about a Judaism of joy and happiness and fulfillment. And now every day I'm holding the hands of college students and Hillel professionals who are scared to their core at the virulent anti-Semitism that is unfolding on every college campus in this country, as well as at many high school campuses. We've seen it even in this local area in high school campuses, where every person who, is waving the flag of humanitarianism is portraying Israel as the devil. And Jews are guilty by association. I learned that lesson years ago. Anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism quickly metastasizes into anti-Semitism. And yes, there's a distinction between the two, and if we had an academic seminar, I could tell you the differences, but right now, I can't. They're totally conflated, and will become more so with every passing day. Rachel's remarks and the way that she was kind of shaken to her core about saying, like, I can no longer talk about a Judaism that's only positive, I'm kind of rolling back into a Judaism of fear and defensiveness, and the world's out to get us. And it reminded me of a sermon that I gave from this bima, well, maybe it might have been the high school, on Kol Nidre of 2006. The title of the sermon was called Back to Auschwitz. And 2 things informed that sermon. The first was, in the spring of 2006, I was invited to lead a Passover Seder at Beit Varsha, the progressive Jewish community of Warsaw, Poland. Again, great story for another time. But nonetheless, it put me in Poland. And on the second day, after I led the Seder, I went for the second night Seder to Krakow, where I sat in a second Seder, another story for another time. Krakow is very close to Auschwitz. And so the day after the second Seder, Sam and I visited Auschwitz for the first time. The second thing that informed that sermon was that in the summer of 2006, right before the fall high holidays, Hezbollah launched an invasion of the north of Israel. Unless you really are a wonk around this stuff, you forget all the incursions of the wars and the attacks, and there have been many. In this case, Hezbollah, just to prove it could, came over the border, ambushed an IDF patrol, killed all the Israeli soldiers there, went back over the border, back into Lebanon, and then started shelling for the next several weeks so that much of the north of Israel needed to evacuate. By the way, a footnote that's gotten lost in all the coverage this week is that there are now 250,000 Israelis who have been relocated, both from the Gaza border and from the north. 250,000. When I gave the sermon back to Auschwitz, I surprised myself and many in this community because I too came into the rabbinate with a commitment to not preaching a Judaism of fear and defensiveness, and they're out to get us, but a Judaism of joy and celebration and human potential and human fulfillment. That's what is at my core, and that's at the core of the DNA of Adat Shalom, because that's what I brought to it. But during that summer of 2006, I reflected in that sermon that perhaps my life experience, growing up in America in the second part of the 20th century, was actually an exception to a millennial pattern of the Jewish experience in the world. And that for me to draw a conclusion from my short lifespan and my privileged status living in America might be deeply erroneous and dangerous to the future survival of the Jewish people. And that's where we are again now. By the way, the title, Back to Auschwitz, was an intended double entendre. My father, who fled Berlin 2 weeks before Kristallnacht, his father, my grandfather, was born in Auschwitz, Poland. I was speaking to a friend of mine about a week after the beginning of the war, another rabbi. I have some friends who are not rabbis, but you get the picture. It was rabbi talk. And I was about to start a retreat with rabbis, and I wasn't sure how to do it, so we had a conversation. He's been a longtime friend. He told me something I'd never heard from him before. He said ever since he was a child, he was obsessed with finding hiding places, both in his home and all around his house. And he wasn't sure where that was coming from. Neither he nor his parents had any direct exposure to the Shoah. My experience with the Shoah is much closer to than his. And then during that first week, he saw footage of Israelis hiding in bunkers, dodging grenades that Hamas terrorists were throwing into the shelters, into the bomb shelters. And suddenly it all flooded back. His childhood obsession with hiding came from the historical trauma of the Jewish people. A couple years ago, we had here a speaker, Tirza Firestone, who talked about something which was a new idea for me. I had never heard the term, epigenetic trauma. The notion that actually trauma can transmit over generations, even if you and your prior generation never had the experience, that it transfers in ways that is hard to understand, and now neuroscience is only trying to get its hands around. And Tirza, who's also another rabbi, has written a book about it. And it's clear to me that Mark's obsession with hiding as a child was exactly this epigenetic trauma playing itself out. Where can Jews run to? Where can they hide? Where can they be safe? I know that I was feeling that in my gut when I heard how scared my daughter Jenny was to be in Israel, living 2 blocks from the nearest shelter, alone, and with Hamas terrorists still at large. And I did not feel that much better when she fled to Germany, back to Auschwitz, indeed. A final story. I'm not sure how many people here remember this, and I'm horrible at remembering years. It was the early 2000s. Rabbi Fred was on sabbatical, so I led the High Holy Days. And I know it was the second day of Rosh Hashanah because this service happened here. I invited a friend of mine, Imam Yahya Hendi, who's the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University, the first Muslim chaplain appointed in the armed forces and on a college campus, by the way. Imam Hendi, who's a beautiful, beautiful individual and a peace activist lifelong. I invited him to come and join me on the Bima for a sermon and dialogue on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. I remember when it was advertised, people in Adat Shalom said, "Really, Sid? I mean, is that the time? I mean, on our High Holy Days, you're going to share the Bima with a Muslim imam?" So I got some pushback. That's okay. I'm a big boy. I said, it'll be fine. I didn't even tell people what the assignment was. Because when I said to Yahya, I said, I want to be in dialogue with you, and the question I want each of us to address is, what do our people need to take ownership of and ask forgiveness for from the other? In the spirit of tshuva on the High Holy Days. I told my story. I owned a lot of our stuff. By our, I mean the Jewish people stuff. And I asked forgiveness. Then Yahya told his story. Anyone here that time, that day? I'm just curious, raise your hand. So Yahya tells a story about when he was somewhere in first or second grade, so he might have been 7 or 8 years old, coming back from school. By the way, you need to know that Yahya's family is now a gigantic Jewish settlement. Every Palestinian home is now part of a Jewish village. So he has what to be angry about. There's no more Arab village there. There's now a Jewish village, and that's happened in many parts of Israel. Yaya's coming home from school. He comes to a couple IDF soldiers, and as he remembers it and tells the story, they roughed him and his buddy up. Didn't sound all that bad, frankly, as he reflected on it, but when you're 8 years old, and someone in a uniform and a gun is 20 years old, it can be pretty terrifying. He came home, he was crying, his mother bandaged him up a little bit, he had a couple scrapes, a bruise on his knee, nothing really serious. And he says to his mother, when I get older, I want to kill as many Israelis as I can. And his mother said to him, I never want to hear you say that again. Never in this household will you take a whole category of people and say you hate them so much you want to kill them. And that brief parental intervention at that moment changed the course of Yahya Hendy's life. Without that, his mother's intervention, he could have easily become a Hamas terrorist. Instead, he spent his life as a peace activist, building bridges to Jews and other people of faith around the world. I was talking to someone I very much respect the other day, and she says to me, can you believe so-and-so, mentions the name of someone we common acquaintance, a Jew? Can you believe so-and-so now loves the Palestinians? I knew there was something wrong about that. But, okay, listen, hung up. And then it occurred to me, I said, since when is loving anyone a crime? Why is loving anyone a sin? That's what war does to us. It sends each of us to our corners, and everyone else is a demon, and you're the only one who has the righteousness on your side. Everything about it is wrong. We must not hate all Palestinians. We must not hate all Muslims. It is forbidden. Even in a liberal Jewish community, I can say it is forbidden. It is against the Torah. It is against every Jewish value that's articulated. It is forbidden to hate Palestinians or Muslims. We can identify a political entity called Hamas and others that are evil and do evil. But it's forbidden to hate a whole category of people, just as we would say, why would Hamas want to kill every Jew on the planet? In the Talmud, Jews are called B'nai Rachamim, people, children of compassion. Now, during a war, our values are being tested. We must work harder at being people of compassion. I speak only here to a local congregation in the greater Washington area, but I speak also to people I love in Israel and people in leadership in Israel. It's forbidden to categorize all Palestinians as Nazis or as evil incarnate. It gets us nowhere. In fact, if it gets us somewhere, it's a place we don't want to go. Now more than ever, we must show up as B'nai Rachamim, people of compassion, and Rodfei Shalom, pursuers of peace. I want to provide a few minutes for comment. The past few weeks, we're very much indebted to Orit Golan and Daniela Wolf, who have convened listening circles after services for people processing all the horrible news coming out of the region. It is time for us to be together in solidarity, but I want to say, before we take a few comments, because of the time, we don't have time for many, but I do want to have some voices here, and hopefully we continue the conversation. But I want to suggest a ground rule for comments, both in the next few minutes, but also as we go forward. As I wrote in my letter to this community about why we postponed the appearance of Yusuf Bashir, who is to be this week our first guest for this year's Shabbat Voices, who's a Palestinian who works here in the area, and with whom I had a long conversation, deciding together that this would not be the time. Yusuf shared with me that he has both a mother and a brother in Gaza, about who he's very concerned. Aaron Schneer is quite friendly with Yusuf Bashir. They did Seeds of Peace together as a program. And he told me this morning when he got here that it has now been more than a week since Yusuf has even heard from his mother or brother. So it's not clear whether they're still alive or not. And in that letter I said, we are a large community and we do not need to have any consensus around how we think about this issue. And so it's not the time for debate or argument. If someone says something, whether you want to talk to me about something I've said this morning, or someone else who makes a comment, or in the conversations you have even outside the context of Adat Shalom, inquire with curiosity. You may learn something, and the views you held up to that moment may be wrong. Even as something I said this morning that I believe deeply, and I spoke this morning from my heart, not just from my head, and I may be wrong about some things too. I think that's the kind of respectful dialogue that we need to model here at Adat Shalom. I hope we can do that. We'll take just 2 or 3 comments, and then I want to end on, if it's possible, an inspiring note. There's 2 short videos that I was very moved by this week. I can't sit through them without breaking down into tears. And I want to end by showing that, and we'll move the monitor more centrally and invite you to come close because some of it is subtitled. But I want to allow for maybe 3 or 4 comments right now, and then we'll do the video to close the conversation. Share, please. Yeah.
First, thank you, Rabbi Sid. I was so moved, and I loved what you said.
A little louder.
I was so moved, and I loved what you said, so thank you. First comment is, personally as an Israeli, I spent the first week horrified by what happened in Israel, and the next 3 weeks just heartbroken at the anti-Semitism that has broken out. I feel so deeply betrayed. If you all haven't seen, there's an article on CNN by Shai Davidovi, who is a Columbia professor. He just articulates so well how I think a lot of us feel. Finally, I wanted to, listening to you now, what occurred to me is I completely agree with sharing the land, completely agree. But when you say 2-state solution, I don't want to be responsible for their state. Because there's Iran and Qatar and all them. I want to have our state, they can have their land, they figure out what they do with it.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Ann, right behind you. Oh, Bruce and Ann.
I'm Bruce Kutnick. I have
Bruce,
a brother.
closer.
I am Bruce Kutnick. I have a brother and sister who live in Israel. My brother lives in the north, and he was evacuated. And fortunately, he's now living on another kibbutz, and he's okay. All right. I was talking to them about this issue of looking in the longer run when Israel is in the process of dealing with the Palestinians in Gaza. One has to be careful of what will the implications be later on. Both of them became very angry with me, saying this is not the time to worry about that. Maybe later on they can deal with this. Right now they're both concerned about their grandchildren being in the army and surviving and being at the front. They try to differentiate between Hamas and the Palestinians in Gaza. The Palestinians in Gaza and the UN and other try not to differentiate. They want to make people believe that Hamas is the same as the Palestinians living in there. So a few days ago, they showed a photo on TV of people breaking into the UN to get food and other things. And the question that I have is, how many of them were from Hamas?
Yeah. Bruce, thank you for sharing.
All right.
I'm going to pass it on, and we'll go to the other side next. Thank you for sharing that.
I think this may follow from what Bruce said.
And put the mic near your mouth, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to preface this by saying I am 1 year younger than the state of Israel, and I grew up feeling, that was sort of related to 13 months younger, related to me in a special way. I have to say this, and it's really hard, and I hope this is a safe place. I am horrified by how the Israeli government is reacting right now, I found myself saying to myself, but don't Palestinian lives matter too? And I feel horrible, and I feel like it's also really counterproductive. And I think that's the point that relates to what Bruce is saying. In the first week after October 7th, there was no question on where the morality lay. Hamas was evil, is always evil, and Israel was the victim of this evil. But the reaction to it is taking the mantle of morality away from Israel in the eyes of the world. Israel cannot survive without support from outside the world. It's a small state. And I am horrified by that. I haven't fully separated all my own feelings, and I am so appreciative of all the things that you have said this morning. But I do feel like it's not entirely black and white. October 7th was black and white.
Right.
You know, bombing a school because there was a Hamas commander hiding in it is not black and white.
Thank you, Ann. We'll take 2 or 3 comments on this side, and we won't have time for everyone. So Susanna, and then in the back, 2 in the back, okay?
I'm Susanna Isaacson. I've been a member of this community since 3 years in. I spent the first 15 years of my life in post-Holocaust Romania living in profound fear, to the point where we had kittens and I wanted to know if the kittens were Jewish. After coming to the United States, I spent 32 years working at the CIA. So I have been both victim and colonizer. I never thought of myself as those things. I don't feel safe. I go back to the feeling of fear that I had when I was growing up. So what I've come up with is that the only way to feel safe is with you, my people. I feel safety with you, whatever safety means. And that's what brings me here, and that's what keeps me here.
Thank you, Susanna. Back here.
Thank you. I'm not good in talking to a microphone, but I'll try.
Introduce yourself, please.
What is it?
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Oh, Daniela Wolf. And for me, one of the greatest challenge, I'm Israeli, and one of the greatest challenge is how to ground myself in my humanity amidst fear, atrocities, and my own political and otherwise convictions of human rights. And that is a daily struggle. In our meeting, I share often of the various shifts that I'm experiencing from my own rage to trying to find windows of compassion to others and admitting that at times I cannot. And then there are small instances where all of a sudden some old self is able to connect and recognize the suffering of others. I am never asking others to be like myself or to give up their fear or their hurt. I honor my own immense fear, being the daughter of Holocaust survivors, with the sort of split psyche of what has been mentioned here, needing to hide, and all of that. So I think I really resonated with your words, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Daniela. Okay, I'm afraid we just don't have the time. I want to show this video. There are many, many more hands. I think we'll continue to be having these circles afterwards. Please have conversations at the ONEG. We need each other. We need to talk to each other. There was the yellow sheet of paper that a lot of people picked up on the way in. I want to say a word about that before what we set up the video. So let's move that forward, Maria, please. You know, putting out statements is kind of becomes a growth industry at a time of conflict. And I, with great reticence, you know, got a lot of things coming into my inbox. I only signed 2, and this was one of them. Trua, you've heard me mention before. I served on the board of Trua, which used to be Rabbis for Human Rights. They renamed themselves Trua, the Rabbinic Call for Human Rights, only because Rabbis for Human Rights in Israel is a separate organization, so we work closely with them. I felt that this statement did a beautiful job of essentially speaking to both a love of Israel, a need for solidarity at this moment, but also how we act driven by human rights. So not for now. The other sheet of paper that's coming out around is this. The video I'm about to show you, I found very inspiring. There are 2. One gives you some sense about how Israelis responded to the crisis at a time when the government not only failed to have the intelligence to know what was happening, but also couldn't respond in the first 24 hours to people who were under attack with terrorists in their homes. And in the following days, for the humanitarian needs of Israelis, the Israeli government was essentially absent, totally absent. I heard Thomas Friedman on a podcast say, I've spent a half century in the region. I knew every Israeli political player possible. She says, I can't name a single person in his cabinet. They're all political hacks who have no clue about how to administer anything. So why are we surprised with what's happened? That's what happens when a government is put together simply to get the votes to stay in power and not to try and provide good governance. So the first video is a video of how Israeli citizens have responded. And if you don't know this, you need to know this. The people who took the leadership of responding for Israel are the people who were in the leadership of the protest movement of the past 9 months. They took the organizing know-how of having demonstrations every Saturday night for the past 9 months, and within a matter of hours, they turned it over to helping the entire population and supporting the efforts with regard to the war. It's an amazing video. The second video is very powerful. It's from the Israeli Philharmonic. It's being passed out right now with our captions. I would urge people, it's way better to see the video and read the subtitles there if you can, which might mean people on the ends should come closer to the monitor. If you are not able or don't want to move, you have it there, but to see the face of the conductor giving this speech is very, very powerful, and I don't want to tell you more because so please relocate yourself in a way so you can be close to the monitor, you can go back to your seat. It's about 8 minutes video between the 2 of them. So try and position yourself in a way you can see the monitor. It's well worth your time. You can stand in the aisle too, just don't block anyone. And you can move up to the floor, come close to the bima, no one's going to bite you. Come on up, come on, come on, come on. The carpet on the floor in front of the bima has been child tested. You will not fall through the floor. You can sit on the carpet. The children do it all the time. Oh yes, so people who are on Zoom, in the chat box on Zoom, we put links to the 2 videos, so you probably will not get good sound or vocal quality here, but you can click the Zoom and you'll see it there. So if you want to see it, I urge you to come closer in the back. You won't see it from back there probably, okay?
There was a food pantry built out and a pharmacy built out.
14,000 different packages were sent to this storage. We have here everything from diapers to power banks. All the time we get equipment for soldiers. It's not a hardcore military equipment. We don't have M16 rifles in here. We send it from here, from Jerusalem, with love to the front.
The top floor of the operation is their command center. These are multiple little units, all responsible for different ends of their operation.
The department in charge of hosting, so these team have managed to place thousands of people in hospitals
deliver